Welcome to the Truer Business Podcast with Cara Ferreira
and Lauren Van Mullum. This season, we're looking at how online entrepreneurs built businesses around what they wanted for their lives.
We're talking to people who broke out of the follow my formula mindset to find what worked for them so that you can find the way that works for you.
What do you really want?
All right, and today we are chatting with Stephanie Wasylyk. She's, again, another friend of Lauren's. Lauren's well connected out there with all the entrepreneurs, but she runs a business around sort of planning your ideal calendar, especially for ADHD entrepreneurs.
Yes, she's a business coach who specializes in people who are on that spectrum, whether you are diagnosed or not. I feel like I am in that category. And I'm really excited about this episode because planning my ideal calendar is something I've been passionately trying to do for years. And I feel like I've only just nailed it maybe 3 years in. And the key is holding boundaries. And that's the hard part. So we talk a lot about that. And she also has a wonderful take on giving yourself permission to do less.
Yes, which I think a lot of us need when we're launching our businesses and we feel like there's so much that we can be doing all of the time. And this is something that was really informative for me because founding my own business, a lot of it really was having control over my schedule. And I don't think I've perfected the process yet. I'm always sort of incorporating new things and seeing what works. And Stephanie has a lot of great ideas around this.
Yeah, the thing that always gets me is I have full control over my calendar, except the people pleasing gets in the way and then everything breaks down.
Right. We definitely get into that in the episode. Whether or not you're on the ADHD spectrum or not, if that's a thing you struggle with, there are some gold nuggets in here for you.
Enjoy.
All right. So we're officially recording. We were all just chatting sort of off recording about how Lauren and I launched this podcast really to sort of get to the truth of what real life entrepreneurs that we know, what they've done to be successful online. And Stephanie just shared the title of a blog post, which was amazing. So why don't you jump in there, Stephanie?
Oh, well, I'd have to look it up for the exact title, but I think it was why it took me 9 years to reach 6 figures or to reach 100K, something like that.
Which is perfect as we're trying to be the antidote to the launch an online course and make 6 figures tomorrow market that's out there.
Exactly. I'm with you.
I think that timeline is really interesting because in my first incarnation of my business, it also, like at the 9-year mark, that's when I was brushing the ceiling of 6 figures and I was working so hard because I wanted that number so badly and I burnt out. And I still haven't hit it. 15 years.
So Stephanie, what was that journey sort of like for you? Why did you start your business? And what were the goals when you first started out?
So I started out, and I'm in Canada, so this may not make sense to people not in a northern climate, but I started out, I didn't have kids, but I just said, I want to be able to take a snow day if I need to. If my future potential child needs to take a day off school for a snow day, which one might be here tomorrow in Canada, we'll see, I need to be flexible enough that that's doable. I also have a partner who's a geologist, and we were living in Australia at the time, and I just didn't want to have to restart my career and look for new jobs every time we potentially moved. And so, I know a lot of people start businesses for altruistic reasons and they want to serve people and help the world. And I was like, I just need a job that's going to fit my life.
I love that. Yeah, that was one of the things for me starting my job. I had our dog, Grayson, when he was a puppy, he had an allergy that we weren't aware of. So we had all these digestive issues that were pretty serious. And I remember I was working at the UN at the time. I thought having to call my boss, like, I can't come into work today because my puppy is sick. And being like,
right?
Seriously, your puppy? But I remember I planted that seed. It's like, I don't want it to be an issue when my dog is sick, but also like someday I'm probably going to have kids and I don't want to have it be an issue when I'm like, my kid's sick, I'm not coming in today.
Well, I'll tell you the other side of it, though, because I did get a puppy while I work from home, and now he has separation anxiety when anyone's not in the house because we never leave.
Oh,
the two-sided coin.
I think it's really interesting to me, sort of how women approach planning their careers, especially if we are starting our businesses. It's always with that whisper in the back of our minds, oh, what if I have kids and I need all of this flexibility built in? Like, that's how I was sort of cultured to think since birth. And then I've gone through a whole journey of, I don't even know if I want kids. And yet I built a business to give me the flexibility for that. And then instead I'm using that flexibility for all of these really fun things.
Because as humans, we need that. Like, we so need that, even just to go grocery shopping, not on a super busy day, or to go to an appointment. We totally need that.
Yes.
And in terms of, I sort of segue into this, so you work with people to sort of create their ideal schedules and set boundaries around it. But was that what you started out doing? Like, how did your business develop? Did your target market, the problems you were solving for people, has that evolved over time?
Oh yeah, it's been all over the place. So I'm I'm 13 years into my business as of this month. And I started as a health coach 13 years ago, quickly changed.
Me too, don't we all?
Well, right, exactly. But quickly, like, that was not my thing. But I love coaching. And so I'm a business coach. But I feel like I'm not the kind of business coach that was just like, I started a business. Now I can teach other people how to start a business. I have worked in, oh gosh, a dozen more, 15, 16 other businesses where I've been a coach in their business. And so I have seen behind the scenes of so many like 6 and 7 figure businesses. I've seen what they do, what works, what is horrible and doesn't work at all. All of that experience has really brought me to where I am today. And I know that the listeners are potentially starting their own business or, in that beginning phase. And that really, really, really helped me with my income, with my experience, with connections and meeting people. Like, working in somebody else's business, I think, was so important. We kind of like think we have to have our own business and then you're just working by yourself all day long, every day. But I have loved, like, probably 50 to 70% of my income over the last 13 years has been from working with other people.
That's a really good point, because I learned the hard way and middle of the road. Like, I learned very late to diversify my income streams, because I started just having one main client, and that was where all of my income was basically coming from. And then I'd have a couple of side projects. But when I had my I quit everything meltdown, it was just after my primary client had that meltdown also. So my income came to a crashing halt. My patience, my will for doing any of the work, just all of it came crashing down at the same time. So yeah, diversifying income streams is actually really important as an entrepreneur.
You can't see me nodding vigorously, but seriously, I did the same thing. I had 4-day-a-week work with one particular person and 1 day a week on my own business. And I went into a meeting planning on asking for a raise, and she told me she was shutting her business down. And it was by far the worst day in my business ever, but it was such a wake-up call. Like, we need to be careful about that, especially when your clients are business owners and things change, right?
Yeah, if you're not like a big company, you're working for like a solopreneur or a small business, right? So in this 13 years you've been in business, for how many of those years, like, are you still working in other companies part-time, or how many of those years have you been doing that as well?
Yeah, I am definitely still working in other businesses. I have some fabulous long-term relationships with some people, and they're not a huge amount of my time, but yeah, they just kind of keep me going. They're that steady income, as steady as any business owner can provide you with income. And it's just delightful. I get to meet people. I get to learn stuff. I get to test out different skills as well and put my hand up and say, like, hey, let's try that. Yeah, it's really great. And that was the year that I hit 6 figures. I just had a very lucrative client, basically. And so I'm no longer at the 6-figure mark because that client was not a healthy client for me. And so I don't work with them anymore. And unfortunately, that was a big dip in income.
Okay, so Kara and I were just having this conversation about the choices that we've made where, like, there was like a big just pot of money and somebody was offering it to us, but it came with strings attached that would mess up some corner of our lives that we're like, I'm not willing to give that up. I'd love to hear about making that judgment call of saying no to a boatload of money because something else is actually more important.
I have so much to say about that. Let's see if I could contain it. Because I would say my business has been filled with risks and decisions like that. This was one of them. But for example, my partner right now is doing a PhD. Like, it is not a reasonable thing to have a self-employment income and a partner doing a PhD. That's not reasonable. But it was the absolute best decision for us and our family and his happiness and his future career. And this is not me like some woe is me woman who like deferred to my husband. This is, me as the breadwinner, but also as someone who just wants a harmonious family, right? And another good role model. But it was a big freaking risk to do that, right? It's a huge risk. But this particular one, there's some complexities. For one of the ways that I ended up turning down significant money was I decided to step down from a leadership role in that company. So I had been making quite a lot more because I was leading a team, and I just don't enjoy that. I really don't want to be responsible for a team of coaches and their quality of work and their results. So I stepped down from that. And then the secondary decision was I became one of many coaches in that company. When I started, I was the coach in the company, and I became one of many. And when that happens, they typically want to pay me less because they want to put me on par with all the other coaches. And that's totally fine. I actually like when that happens. It makes it very easy for me to say, no, I'm out. I'll move on to the next project. And so it was kind of a two-phase approach, me stepping down from leadership, but then also the company had outgrown my services because I tend to come in at the beginning when the business owner hasn't hired a coach before to deliver their services. I charge what is very fair for that. And it tends to be more than like a beginner coach, right? They're not paying me like minimum coaching wage for that. But then when they've hired 2, 3, 4, 5 other coaches, they don't need to pay me the bigger amount unless I'm leading those coaches, which I don't like doing. And so it doesn't make sense for them to keep me anymore. And so that's why I've worked with so many companies, because I really help set them up and then move on. So it's not like on my website that I do this or anything. It's just something I kind of find word of mouth and join companies that sound fun and interesting, and we go from there.
That's another cool train of thought, because I've also sort of developed my services to work with the way I enjoy working with people, because I'll do my brush with the big bucks. And in my frame of reference, honestly, big bucks is anything above 6 figures, because that's just where I am in my life and in my familial money culture. Like, that seems like a lot of money to me. Also, I was a freaking English major. Like, right?
I'm a French history major, Lauren. I get it.
Exactly. Like, my expectations for my life are pretty humble. But no, I did. I said no to Adobe. I was interviewing with them for like 6 months. It was the longest interviewing process I've ever been a part of, and I would never do that to myself again. And they were finally like at that moment of like, okay, I think we might want to hire you. And by that time, I had gotten a pretty good feeling for their company culture and their level of professionalism and knowledge in their industry. And I knew what I could bring to the table, and I also knew how hard it would be to bring what they needed to the table when they didn't know that they needed it. So here's the secret about big established companies. They're not as on the cutting edge as the latest, newest baby startups, because the latest, newest baby startups, they have a lot of catching up to do. They're just pulling out every stop. They're figuring out things that nobody has done before, and they are innovating. And that was my world. For 9 years. That's where I was at doing copy. And then I was doing this Adobe thing, and I'm like, oh, do you know about this, and then the other thing? I was working with this company. They were doing this thing. And the poor guy on the other end was like a deer in headlights. And I'm like, oh no, I have just asserted dominance in this situation because I know all of this stuff from working with so many cutting edge tech companies, and they're not there. So I knew it was going to be an uphill battle. I knew I would have to make myself smaller to do that. And I also knew that it kind of looked like a shit show. And I'm like, okay, you're going to take over my entire life. You're going to pay me a lot of money to do that, but it's going to be a really stressful situation. Or I can double down on building my own business and take it more seriously than I ever have. And I went that way. It was a good call. No regrets. And no, I'm still not making the money I would have with Adobe, but I can take 2-hour lunch breaks to go to Pilates in the middle of the day.
Yeah. And I think that's something we touched on in our introduction episode, Lauren and I, that for Lauren, like time freedom, the ability to do what she wants with her time is more important than that pot of money. So for you, Stephanie, when you have these sort of clients where you're like, what are some of the guiding principles where you're like, okay, like I could get that pot of money, but like that's going to impinge on either just my passion for the work that I want to do, or is it the time freedom? Like what are some of the things that really guide how you make those decisions for your own business?
Oh, like 1000% the time freedom, the flexibility, that part. I love not having a commute. So like getting a job, I think is a little out of the question for me. Yeah, like before this call, I was reading a book because I can do that, right? How glorious is that? I take Fridays off because I frankly just don't want to work Fridays. 5 days a week is too many days, right? And those are incredibly important to me. I want to be able to go on field trips with my daughter, or take March break off, or take time off in the summer, or like in the summer, if I have a light day, I'll like go to the beach or something. That is so important to me. So on one hand, that's a big part of my decision making. On the other hand, the type of work that I'm doing is also really, really important for me. So I want to know that I can actually help my client, right? I want to make sure I'm taking work that's within my area of expertise. And over the years, I've dabbled in different levels of ethical businesses, and I've had to leave some that were just teaching stuff that I didn't believe in, or where their clients just weren't getting results. These are not in my own clients now. We're talking about the companies that I've worked in. If their system and their methodology is not getting a client results, first I work with them to change that. I hope that we can get them results, but sometimes they're just shitty methodologies, right? And I'm not going to be part of that. So sometimes it takes me longer than others to leave because leaving that income is hard. So I do my best to help them internally, but sometimes I can't help them and I just got to cut ties.
So we're all talking about this at a pretty high level because we've all been in business for about the same amount of time. Let's go back in time. Let's go back in time to when we were starting. And I actually want to do this through the lens of how our calendars have evolved, how we have figured out how to create this time for ourselves. Because I know when I was starting out, I was horrible at boundaries. I was horrible at double, triple booking my time. I was horrible at saying, oh, I think this is going to take, an hour because I'm really fast and I'm really sharp. And that was true for me that day. And then the day I actually had to do the work was like, first day of my period, I'm absolutely exhausted. I'm flat out on the couch and I am struggling to do this thing that would take me 1 hour the week before. And then this week it's taking me the entire day. So I was really bad at all of those things. I would love to know how your calendar, and I'm kind of using that as a broad term for how you organize your time, how has that shifted from when you were a new baby coach to now?
So when I was a new baby coach, I had a part-time job, not a very time-intensive one. I was a chiropractic assistant. It was lovely. It paid some bills. And my partner was working out of town. I forget what his rotation was. He'd be back for a week at a time and gone for 2, let's say. And so when I wasn't working for the chiropractor, my partner wasn't there, I had so much time. Time was not a constraint that I needed to worry about, but I was never the kind of person that would work evenings and weekends. That was just not in my DNA to agree to sign up for that. My problem, though, was not calendaring. It was saying yes to everything. So I would see an opportunity and be like, cool, yeah, let's do it. Or I would see, this was back like I don't even know if Facebook groups existed then. I had started with some ads. I was like learning all about Facebook and all. Facebook groups must have existed. But anyways, it was like I was a sponge and I was learning everything and it was all exciting and I loved doing it all. I made my own website. I designed my own program. I was still in coach training. Like I did it all. But what happened maybe a year in, like I told you, I switched from health coaching to business coaching. I realized I was still doing so many things that were just I had committed to, but that really weren't furthering my current business. So I was doing a podcast. It was the top rated health podcast in Australia, but I didn't need to do a health podcast anymore, you know? So I was also, oh my gosh, I forgot about this. I was co-hosting a retreat, a health retreat with my co-hosts, and I had to bow out and they were not thrilled about that. But I was like, listen, this is not the right thing for me anymore. And they were fine with it, obviously, in the end. But I was giving talks and stuff at these chiropractic conventions and stuff, which like, because again, in the health world, I was so burnt out. I was so burnt out. I got a call that my father-in-law had got stung by a wasp. He's deathly allergic to wasps. He was in the hospital. And it like pushed me over the edge into actual burnout. Like I couldn't get through the day without napping. I couldn't exercise. I couldn't function. It had just all cascaded all into one thing. And then I just remember drawing this big mind map on my wall of all the things I'm working on and just systematically crossing them off and quitting them and backing out of commitments until what was left on that mind map was what actually made sense for me. And so I know that's not a calendaring thing, but that is the root cause behind all of it, right? When you have too many things on your plate, you have to really look back and say, how do I want to be spending my time? What is this leading towards? And that, yeah, I mean, that was a life-changing mind map. If you don't know what a mind map is, you can Google it, but it's just a wonderful way of brainstorming ideas.
I love that also as a way of organizing your calendar. Because what is a calendar but priorities set by time? Kara, I'm curious about your calendar story also.
I think I've typically been better than most at boundaries, actually, in terms of saying no. More so, I think, in my social life. I'm just sort of like, no, I'm not going to that party. Like, remember I used to, because at one point when I first started, I was still in my UN job. And I was also working very part-time with the horseback riding program that I still work with. And it was more of a health coach, shifted into more VA and then into website designer. So I was doing like all those three things. So I was like, I'm busy and I'm going back and forth from Connecticut and New York City. So I was like, Sundays, I don't do anything. I like don't even leave the house. I remember like we got invited to this dinner party. It was on a Sunday and he was really excited about it. I was like, I'm not going. Like, I don't go anywhere on Sundays. I'm a busy person. So I have one day to recharge. So I think socially, I've always been pretty good about managing those boundaries. Work has been a bit of a journey in terms of feeling like if somebody emails me and I see it, I have to respond, those sorts of things. But at this point, I have very set hours of business. Like if you email me after 5, I'm not going to get back to you. If you text me after 5, I'm going to email you the next day during business hours. I will not respond to your text message if you're a client, or I'll just tell them like I'm not working right now. So I feel like I've gotten much better at those things. But I also feel like I felt like I had to earn it. And I kind of wish that like 6 years ago, I just was like, this burns me out. I'm not doing it. Instead of waiting till I feel like I'm at this point now where like my quality of work is high enough, my portfolio is big enough that I feel like those people are like, they're going to wait for me. Whereas before I felt like maybe that wasn't the case.
Oh, I think confidence is a huge piece of being able to set healthy boundaries, of being able to say, this is the availability I have. I'm not going to cram you in the middle of the only time I have to eat food. Which I actually just did yesterday. So I'm clearly not perfect at this, but it was a funny thing that happened this week. My December schedule is impacted. Like it's so stuffed. Like every second is accounted for because I'm trying to take 2 weeks off at the end of the month for holidays, but really to work on my book, to work on other priorities I haven't been able to do. So every second is color coded. So I was sharing screenshots of my calendar to try and squeeze a couple more people in. And they saw my calendar. They're like, oh my gosh, your calendar is so beautiful. I've never seen anybody use Google Calendar that way. And I'm like, thank you. It's taken me 15 years to get there. Like, things are not double booked. And that's what makes it really look messy. So as soon as you stop double booking yourself and you decide, like, my morning is going to just be an easy morning, an email morning, or a book morning. And that's like what I have figured out that I need to succeed in my day. This morning was supposed to be a book morning, and I slept in instead. It was glorious, and it's what I needed. So, but figuring out what that calendar should look like and what activities in the course of the day, in the course of the week, in the course of the month work best for me. That's only been something I've been practicing maybe for the last, and I mean practicing like I'm picking up the ukulele, like it was not pretty in the beginning. I've been practicing that for 3 years. And I feel like I'm finally hitting a moment of proficiency.
I'm wondering, sort of, Stephanie, what are your tips to like the earlier versions of Lauren and I who are really struggling with this? Like, how do people get started so maybe they can start earlier in their online careers than Lauren and I did?
Yeah, don't wait till year 11. Oh my heavens.
Well, I worked at BlackBerry before I worked for myself, and that really jump-started my calendaring because everything was digital. Before, I used to have a paper calendar. So I've been weaned off the paper calendar many years ago now, as much as I did love it. I have talked to hundreds of people about their calendars, and I get kind of two main responses. Let's call it three. One is the people that only put in their appointments in their calendar, right? So like I have a call with someone, it gets put in my calendar, that's it, right? That's, I would say, the most common for people who are starting to use a calendar. The second thing I get is if every minute of every day was accounted for, I would be overwhelmed and stressed, and I hate it. So, Lauren, I think your calendar is like mine. Every minute is accounted for. It doesn't mean that there aren't breaks and spaces and pauses, but the calendar is full, right? So that's the third one, is when your calendar is full. But some people just can't look at a full calendar without feeling really, really overwhelmed. So they need to leave those empty spaces in their calendar to feel like there's some flexibility for them. I don't know if I fully agree with it, but I'm never going to argue with what somebody needs to feel at their best. So I think everything is worth experimenting with. And if that's something someone wants to experiment with, then go for it. What I have found, though, is that when you start your day and you don't know what you're doing in the day, because there are lots of blank spaces, let's say, your day will more than likely be off the rails or a disaster. I don't know if you guys agree with that, but like, if you're starting your day and you're just going to do whatever you feel like doing, it may or may not be the things you actually need to be doing. And sometimes even if you look at your calendar, you're like, oh, sweet, I got the whole day. I can do whatever I want. To me, those are actually very unsatisfying days because I end up flitting from like email, and then I'll check social media, and maybe I'll go back to my email and then, do check my Voxer, and then maybe I'll go do some dishes, or like it never ends up being this like beautiful creative time or anything like that.
Those days give me so much anxiety.
Yes, I couldn't agree more. So if I want a day off with nothing to do, I actually put in my day off what I want to do.
Me too.
Right? So on an actual day off, a not work day, I'll put like, I'm going to work on knitting the gnome that I'm working on. I want to read my book. I want to go for a hike. Like I'll put those things down and check them off, because or else I get unfocused and derailed for what I'm going to do that day. On a work day, my calendar will have like, well, I'm going to say reading time again, because I do schedule that in because I read a lot of books for work. It'll have, if I have a project that I'm working on for a client, it'll have that in there. It'll have working on my community. There'll be a block of time in there, but not just work on community in quotes. It'll be what specific thing I'm going to do for the community, so that when I get up that morning, I can see all the things that are important and that I need to work on. And I put together all of those things on a Thursday afternoon, all at once in a quiet, calm place, so that I don't have to do it in a rush or on a whim or with some level of urgency. And that when I get there on Monday, my week is planned. Does it mean things change? No, of course they can change, right? But that's how I start.
That was going to be my next question, is when do you sit down with some quiet time to actually consciously plan your calendar? Because I feel like that was one of my early mistakes, is just, oh, when can I cram things in? And it was just always very spur of the moment. It felt like I was always putting out fires because something needed to happen like now, which there are no emergencies in copywriting. So my process with that has evolved over the years. And what I wish I could have told my younger self, who didn't have the confidence to pull this off, but if she did, I would say, block in the promises to yourself. So the promises to myself, if I don't exercise most days out of the week, my back, I have just like bad back genetics. And the way I manage it is a lot of exercise, a lot of core work. I plan those times in. Those are non-negotiables. So I know that swath of time, Monday through Friday, is taken, and we don't mess with that. The second thing that I do is, as you said, I put in space, but I put it in. It's like this, and I color code it. It's gray.
Mine too. Yep. Lunch, gray. Unavailable, gray.
Yeah. And breaks. Oh my gosh. It took me the longest time to actually put in breaks. But when you're having one of those days, like yesterday, I was so tired. I actually had time to take an hour nap because I had planned it in my calendar. I never would have done that when I was starting out. And that's why I kept overpromising and under-delivering, because I would crash one day because my energy was just like flatlined and I would be behind schedule, and then I would be putting out more fires. And it was just, I was a bad professional.
Another one of my little tricks, and I'm only kind of thinking about this now as we're talking, is even if I know something's only going to take me 5 or 10 minutes, like I'll have to reply to comments in my community, I schedule it for half an hour. And it's just like a little trick to myself that gives me the breaks. It means I have time to also check my email or go to the bathroom or whatever, just walk around my house, so that the day never feels like I would never put a 5-minute task in my calendar. I would never schedule it for 5 minutes because that would be insanity.
I do feel like I was one of those people who had a lot of resistance to scheduling downtime or not task things. But the thing that really changed when I started doing that is you actually, once you get to it's the end of the day, like quiet time, or your middle of the day break, you actually have a designated lunch time. You actually get to take that and have it be downtime because it's scheduled. Otherwise, I feel like, especially for entrepreneurs, the work just bleeds into everything. So if you don't schedule that time, you end up kind of just not getting it. Like there's part of your brain that feels like if I schedule it, then it's really not downtime, but you don't get downtime unless you schedule it. So
Absolutely. Absolutely. And listen, like we have so many tech tools now. Like if someone's going to book into your calendar, you can give them a link and you don't even have to say no to them. Your calendar does, right? Like someone asked me the other day, I can only meet on evenings and weekends. And I was like, oh, well, what time zone are you in? Also, here's my booking link. Let me know if you find a time, knowing full well there is 0 evening and weekends. And she booked for some middle of the week, middle of the day time. Like she didn't complain about it. I was like, oh, sweet. I thought we were going to have a fight about that. But no, we didn't, because she looked at my calendar and she decided what her boundaries were. And she decided that she was willing to do whatever. I don't know what she had to do in her life to make that work. And she could have said no.
And that's a big one for the service-based entrepreneurs, because like as a website designer, in the beginning, I was like, oh, I have to change my schedule to make that exploration discovery call, to make that sale, because I need that business, which like there might be times you really do need the business. But then what happens? You book that person for the discovery call in the evening, you sell to them, and then you end up having to do all of your middle of the project calls on the evenings and the weekends, and it goes on and on and on. So those are the ones where it's like, if they're not going to fit into your schedule, then they probably just shouldn't be in your project list.
Or does this happen to you? Almost every time I move a boundary for myself, they cancel
Yes.
or no show. It's like if I make an exception and do a call on a Friday, I can honestly say no word of a lie 75% of the time it doesn't go through, but I have completely changed my entire Friday plan to make sure that works. I've been thinking about it all morning or whatever, and then they don't freaking show up or it's canceled or whatever. And I'm like, I knew it. I knew I shouldn't have done this.
It hasn't happened to me as much, but what does happen is they're the ones who tend to be the most difficult clients. You're like, I did something for you, and now like everything's wrong. You expect this to be this. I don't know. They just tend to be, don't do it, people.
We have to pay attention to those things, right? We have to pay attention to those signals that come to us.
I just want to say for everybody listening, there's so much vigorous nodding between the three of us on this one. Don't move your boundary. Don't. They are untouchable. They're non-negotiable. And if you don't obey this law of the universe, you will pay a price. I promise.
Okay, so I have a little tip for that, because sometimes people like Kara are like, oh, I need the work. I need, like when you were saying, that's when you would kind of push those boundaries. So my rule is push back twice. So if they say, I need to do it on an evening and a weekend, and I say, well, I'm available Wednesdays and Thursdays during the day, and they say, how about Friday afternoon? Then I would push back and say, how about this other day? And every single time I've done that, the second pushback, they just book. It gives you permission. Like if you really want to do it, fine. After 2 pushbacks, agree to it. Cool. Maybe it's totally worth it. But you can try, push back twice and see what happens.
I think that's also good, because even if you do end up changing your boundary after the 2 pushbacks, you've at least shown that like you have enough self-worth and integrity to sort of defend your boundaries before making an accommodation.
And it might help a situation like you were talking about where they then expect it moving forward. If they realize it's an exception, maybe you'll have a better relationship moving forward.
Yeah, I think that's a great piece of advice.
Okay, I want to ask about your work with ADHD entrepreneurs, because the perception of time for a lot of ADHDers, and I am somewhere on that spectrum. I am not diagnosed, but I am somewhere on that spectrum. The perception of time can be really different and very difficult. So I would love to know about the intersection of your work with ADHD entrepreneurs and how you help them handle time.
It's a big question. And I think there's a few things about my philosophy that are important. So one is I truly believe we don't manage time, we manage our attention. And so if you're just trying to manage your time, you're kind of missing the point, right? What we spend our time on is what we think is important or what's getting our attention. And so if we think about it, like what needs my attention today? What do I want to give my attention to? I think that's an important reframe to just like, okay, and this is going to be 10 minutes. This is going to be 15 minutes. Now I've got an hour for this. And like, then you can really start to stack things up. So I think looking at the bigger picture of like, how do I actually want to be spending my time, I think is really important, or spending my attention. And my second philosophy that I'll share right now is that I think everyone has their own way of working and own way of thriving. And so although I write blog posts with, tips and suggestions, I truly think everyone kind of needs to figure out their own way. And they can do that with support. Like I can help them figure out that way, but we want to figure out what are the obstacles for time for you and how are they different from like someone else's, right? So, and then we approach it from that perspective. I also have a lens for self-doubt. So things shows up like procrastination and people pleasing and perfectionism and all of those lovely things. And those influence our time big time. So people with ADHD tend to have quite a lot of self-doubt because they've been told so many times, like, why can't you just do it? Why can't you just get it done? Why aren't you doing it the same way as everyone else? And so they compensate internally with a lot of doubt and making up for that and overworking to make up for those things. And so, as you can imagine, those have massive impacts on our time. So I don't just tell them like, here's how you need to schedule your calendar and then everything is all fixed. I think there's many, many angles to approach scheduling time that are unique to different people and their needs. I know that's kind of a lame answer, but it's the truth. I think it really is the truth.
I think bringing in those other factors that are influencing time so strongly is genius, because it reminded me of another thing, like toxic trait, functional freeze, where if I have a client that I care about so much, I want to impress them so badly, I can't start their project. I just completely, and it will take me days just to start the project because I've freaked myself out over it. And I've got to know that I need to plan that in my timeline, in my proposal. That's taken me years.
Absolutely. And like maybe knowing the first 1, 2, or 3 steps of how to start any project, right? Like, okay, well, maybe I'm frozen when I think about the whole project, but what if I just think about setting them up in Dubsado? Like, okay, I'm just going to set them up in Dubsado. Okay, like maybe that's the first step. And like, okay, my second step is like, I've got a questionnaire for them. Cool. Maybe I'll send them that. And now all of a sudden, there are easy things that you can do on autopilot. I'm not saying those are the right things for that client. I don't know. But maybe there's some muscle memory that can be trained or put in place that can help you through those things. But until you pay attention to where your time is going, you don't know what to solve for.
Yes.
Right? So we have to pay attention to those.
One thing that's really helped, I just want to share this tip because it's one of the best ones I've come up with. When I come hot off the call, like that initial call, and you're so excited and you have a really clear vision of where you want to take that client, I will do a Loom video for my future self. And I will run my future self through everything that is on my brain, everything that needs to happen, the whole vision. And then I will watch that when I'm in freeze mode. And sometimes it gets me out of freeze mode.
Amazing.
Right? Oh my gosh. Life-changing.
But see, people need to find those little tricks for themselves.
Yes.
That probably doesn't apply to every person listening to this, right? Neither to some of the other tips we've talked about. It's that self-discovery that is so important. It's hard. It's hard as hell, right? That's why it takes so long to get this better than before. I don't want to say right, because do you ever get it right? I don't know.
Oh, I really like the better than before.
A good metric.
Gretchen Rubin's book is called Better Than Before. It's really good.
I'm guessing for sort of these projects, how you would schedule things, Stephanie, is instead of just like big block, I'm working on this client, you're saying I'm working on this client, and these are the 3 things I'm working on for this client in this time block. Are you getting that specific with your calendar?
So that is definitely, I think, the way I work best. I'm experimenting currently with a different system. I'm not sold on it yet, but I'll tell you what it is anyways, because I have someone who taught it to me and she swears by it, which is like the time block would just be like a very generic, like work on this project. But then all of the tasks for that project are housed somewhere else. So whether it's Asana or a list or Trello or wherever, so that you kind of have a larger broken down step-by-step checklist somewhere else. So if you have a 2-hour block that says work on Sally's project, you would then go over to Sally's project, look at the task list, and then start working from there. I will say I find it a lot easier to skip tasks this way. So it works well for some people. For me, I'm finding like, I'll do that one later. And then I'm just looking for the easiest dopamine hit on the list rather than what I should actually be working on. So that's why I think I'm much better when I schedule it in my calendar, the thing that I actually need to be working on, because then I'm more likely to do it and not skip it.
For me, what that helps with is if I don't put what I'm actually working on the calendar, I'll be like, oh, I need to work on so-and-so's website. So I'll put like the client's name in the calendar thing. If I don't put in there too what exactly I'm working on, I'll be like, oh, it's going to take me an hour when it's actually going to take me 3 hours. I need the visual of how many tasks are in there. But for my own business, so for my client work, I do make sure the task is in there. For my own business, like working on my business instead of in my business, I typically try to do an hour to 2 hours a day. And it's just sort of like I have that time frame, and then I actually do have the list somewhere else. And it's just sort of like, what can I tackle and make myself sit down and do 2 hours today?
I don't know exactly how you do it, but I would definitely recommend to people that that list is not just like 85 things, right? It needs to be a curated, prioritized list of what's important in the moment. So I used to have this huge long list. I've now parsed it out into like, someday I'm going to do these things. Like I need to add some logos to my website or whatever. This week, I really need to do these 5 things. Because then the rest, the 85 other things are not on my brain.
Yeah, that is true. I definitely probably could do better. Lauren probably is aware of this because I'll be like, oh, I'm going to do this thing. And then I'm talking about it for like 6 months because it's somewhere in the middle of my to-do list. And I haven't actually done it yet. So, yeah. Well, this has been really great. I know we want to be respectful of your time. I'm sure we could all geek out on calendars forever.
Kinda.
Yeah.
And boundaries and all of these really juicy topics. I love it.
Yeah. But we do want to know, just to wrap up here, 13 years in, what is the one piece of advice you would give your baby entrepreneur self when you first started working on your own projects?
Okay, so tough question. I'm trying to think of the overarching things. Like there's all sorts of little tips and stuff, like don't put all your eggs in one basket and things that we kind of talked about in this call. But I think if there's one thing that I'm just so passionate about is that you can do your business exactly how you want it. You don't have to follow somebody else's model, even if you are brand new, or even if you're in an industry where there's a pre-existing established norm. If it doesn't work for you and you don't like it, then you have permission from me and from all of us, I think, to do it the way that works for you, right? We don't need to just create shitty jobs for ourselves. We can create work that's awesome and meaningful and fun. And I'm not one who's going to tell you like your work has to be your passion and work like you'll never get paid and it's fine. Like I don't believe that, but I just think we can have it how we want it. And so let's keep that top of mind. And as we create our business, we can have our goals and our values and our vision there and work towards that.
I love that.
Me too. I feel like we'd have a whole second episode now just to drill down on that further. So.
I know. Okay, so tell everybody where they can find you and if there's anything that you would like them to know about, especially.
Sure. So my website is stephaniewasylyk.com, but I have a community called the Happy Squirrel Collective. So if you Google that, it's way easier than my name. If you Google Happy Squirrel Collective. And it's a community for business owners who want to get shit done their own way. It's ADHD-friendly for those of you who have been burned before by neurotypical communities. And it's my favorite place to spend time and create and help business owners. I also have a newsletter, email list, whatever you want to call it, called Permission Slips. So this is why it's so important. So I just share permission with you to do business your own way in those little letters. And that's stephaniewasylyk.com/permission.
And we'll have all those links in the show notes too. So, well, thank you so much for joining us. This was really fun.
Oh, it has been my pleasure. I'll be back anytime.